9 days after my husband's accident, while he was still lying in a hospital bed with tubes running out of his arm, his own mother sat across from me at a lawyer's office and asked me to sign away my rights to his life. "It's just a formality," she said, sliding a stack of papers across the table with a soft, practiced smile. "We just want what's best for Ryan." What she didn't know was that I had already read every single page the night before, sitting alone in a hospital parking lot at 2 o'clock a.m., and one of those pages had her own signature on a document dated 3 weeks before the accident ever happened. She thought she was locking me out of my husband's life. She had no idea she was about to hand me the exact proof I needed to lock her out of it forever. My name is Natalie. I'm 34, and until 9 days before that meeting, I had a completely normal life. I'm a nurse. My husband Ryan runs his family's construction company, and we'd been married for 6 years. We weren't rich, but we were building something steady, a small house, a shared savings account, and a plan to finally start trying for a baby that fall. Ryan's family had never fully accepted me. His mother, Patricia, made that clear at our wedding when she gave a toast about how Ryan always had good instincts, except once. Everyone laughed except me. His father, Gerald, mostly stayed quiet and let Patricia run the family the way she ran everything else, with a smile and an iron grip underneath it. Ryan's younger sister, Kayla, had been given a management position at the family company straight out of college, despite never once showing up before noon. Ryan and I had built our life carefully around his family, because that's what you do when you love someone whose family comes as a package deal. I learned to smile through the comments. I learned to let Patricia help with things I never asked for help with, redecorating our guest room while we were on our honeymoon, showing up unannounced with groceries because young couples never eat properly. I told myself it didn't matter because Ryan and I were solid and nothing his family said could touch what we had. Ryan used to apologize for her after every visit, squeezing my hand in the car and saying, "She means well, she just doesn't know how to show it any other way." I believed him, mostly because I wanted to. The one thing Ryan never talked about much was the company itself. His grandfather had started it as a small crew doing residential jobs, and over 30 years it had grown into a business with commercial contracts worth millions. Ryan owned 25%, Patricia and Gerald split the rest between them and a family trust, and Kayla, despite her attendance record, technically held a small management title that came with a company car and an expense account. Ryan had mentioned once, almost in passing, that his mother didn't love how independent he'd become about the business lately, how he'd started pushing back on decisions instead of just going along with whatever she and Gerald wanted. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. I wish I had. Then on a Tuesday evening in early spring, Ryan didn't come home from a job site. A delivery truck had run a red light and hit his car broadside. By the time I got the call, he was already in surgery. I remember standing in the hospital hallway in my scrubs, still smelling like the ICU I'd just clocked out of, waiting for a doctor to tell me whether my husband was going to survive the night. He did survive, but the accident left him in a medically induced coma, with swelling on his brain that the doctors said could take weeks or longer to go down. For the first 4 days, I barely left his side. I slept in a chair. I held his hand and talked to him about nothing, because the nurses on the unit had told me it might help. It was on the 5th day that Patricia showed up with a folder. She hugged me in the hallway, told me how strong I was being, and then said she'd been looking into some things just to be safe. She explained that because Ryan wasn't able to make decisions for himself, someone needed to step in and manage his affairs, the business, the finances, the house, until he woke up. She said it so gently, so reasonably, that for a moment I almost thanked her for thinking ahead. Then she said the part that made the hair on my arm stand up. "Since you two never got around to updating your wills or setting up power of attorney for each other, the family attorney thinks it makes the most sense for Gerald and me to step in as his guardians. Just temporarily, of course." I told her I'd think about it. What I actually did was call the hospital's patient advocate that same afternoon and ask a very simple question. As Ryan's legal spouse, didn't I already have priority as his decision maker? The advocate confirmed what I already suspected. In our state, a spouse is automatically the default medical decision maker unless a court says otherwise. Patricia knew that, which meant whatever she was building toward wasn't about who could legally decide things for Ryan. It was about something else entirely. That night, sitting in the hospital parking lot because I needed air and I didn't want Ryan's monitors to hear me cry, I started going through every email Patricia had sent me over the past 5 days. Buried in a forwarded thread meant for someone else, I found a message from 3 weeks before the accident. It was between Patricia and a lawyer named Mr. Ashford, someone I'd never heard of, someone who was not the family's usual attorney. The subject line read, "Restructuring Ryan's shares." Inside, Patricia had written that Ryan had been difficult to work with lately about the future of the company, and that she wanted to explore options for protecting family assets in case Ryan ever tried to sell his stake or, in her words, let outside influence make decisions he'll regret. I didn't need to guess who the outside influence was. I sat in that parking lot for almost an hour, reading it 3 times, before I understood what I was looking at. This wasn't a plan that started with the accident. The accident had just handed Patricia the perfect excuse to speed it up. The next morning, I called my cousin Danielle, who works as a paralegal for a firm downtown. I read her the email over the phone, word for word. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Natalie, that email is dated before the accident. If she's trying to get emergency guardianship now and claiming this is all reactive, that email could blow the whole thing up. But you need your own lawyer today, not next week." She gave me the name of a family law attorney named Robert Chen, who specialized in exactly this kind of guardianship dispute. I called his office before I even left the parking lot. Robert listened to the whole story without interrupting once. When I finished, he asked me to forward him the email, then said something I've thought about every day since. "Natalie, what your mother-in-law is doing has a name. It's called guardianship abuse, and it happens more than people think, especially when there's a family business involved. The good news is you caught it early and you caught it in writing." He explained that Patricia's plan likely wasn't really about caring for Ryan while he healed. It was about using his incapacity as a legal doorway to restructure the ownership of the company before he woke up and could stop her, locking in changes that would be much harder to undo later. 2 days later, Patricia called and asked me to meet her and Gerald at Mr. Ashford's office to sort out the paperwork so everyone could focus on Ryan. I agreed, because Robert told me exactly what to do. Go. Let her think everything is normal. Bring me with you. I didn't tell her I was bringing my own attorney until we were already sitting in the waiting room, and I watched her face go still for just a second before she recovered her composure. Inside the meeting, Mr. Ashford slid a stack of documents across the table, the same kind of soft smile on his face that Patricia always wore. "This simply establishes temporary guardianship for Ryan's medical and financial decisions while he recovers," he said. "Standard language, nothing unusual." Patricia added in that same warm, reasonable voice she'd used in the hospital hallway, "It's just a formality, sweetheart. We just want what's best for Ryan." I already knew from the papers Robert had reviewed the night before that buried on page 14 was language that didn't just cover medical decisions. It quietly transferred decision-making authority over Ryan's 25% stake in the family company to Gerald and Patricia jointly, for a minimum of 1 year, regardless of when Ryan woke up or how quickly he recovered. Robert slid a single page across the table in return, the printed email between Patricia and Mr. Ashford dated 3 weeks before the accident. The room went completely silent. "I have a few questions before my client signs anything," Robert said calmly. "Specifically, why was this same law firm discussing restructuring Ryan's ownership stake weeks before he was ever injured?" Gerald's face went pale. Patricia's smile finally cracked. She reached for the page and Robert calmly pulled it back. "This is a copy. The original is already with Natalie's file." For a moment, nobody in the room moved. I watched Patricia's eyes flick to Gerald, then to Mr. Ashford, then back to me, doing the same math I had already done in that parking lot 3 days earlier, realizing there was no smooth explanation that made the timing look innocent. Mr. Ashford shifted in his chair and reached for his own folder, as if there might be some other document that could fix what the room had just seen. There wasn't. Mr. Ashford tried to recover, saying the email was simply preliminary planning that had nothing to do with the accident. Robert asked evenly, "Preliminary planning for what exactly?" Ryan's ownership stake, discussed weeks before a random car accident, and now suddenly urgent enough to require emergency guardianship papers signed while he's unconscious in a hospital bed. A judge is going to want that question answered too, and I don't think preliminary planning is going to satisfy them. Patricia's voice sharpened for the first time since I'd known her, all the warmth gone. "You have no idea what you're interfering with. This company has been in our family for 30 years. Ryan would understand." I looked at her and said the only thing I had left to say. Ryan would understand a wife protecting him while he can't protect himself. What he wouldn't understand is his own mother trying to take his company from him the moment he couldn't stop her. Gerald, who had barely spoken the entire meeting, finally said quietly, "Patricia, I told you this was too risky while he's still in the hospital." It was the first time I realized he might not have wanted any of this either, just gone along with it the way he'd gone along with everything else for 30 years. We didn't sign anything that day. Robert filed a motion the following morning making clear that, as Ryan's spouse, I retained full legal authority over his medical and financial decisions, and formally objected to any guardianship petition from Patricia or Gerald. He also forwarded the email to Ryan's actual family attorney, the one who had handled the company's affairs for over a decade, and had no idea Mr. Ashford had been quietly brought in behind his back. That attorney, it turned out, was furious to learn someone had been contacted separately to draft paperwork affecting a business he'd represented for years. Ryan woke up 11 days later. The swelling went down faster than the doctors expected and slower than I could bear to wait for. The first thing he asked, once he could form full sentences again, was whether I was okay. The second thing he asked, once I explained everything calmly, one piece at a time, was to see the email for himself. He read it twice. Then he asked me to call Robert and set up a meeting because he wanted to hear the whole thing directly from his mother in front of a lawyer while he was fully conscious and able to speak for himself. That meeting happened 3 weeks after he woke up. Patricia tried at first to frame the whole thing as concern that had simply gotten handled the wrong way. Ryan let her finish. Then he asked one question. Mom, if this was really about protecting the company for me, why did Mr. Ashford's file include a line changing the ownership percentages permanently, not just during my recovery? Nobody at the table had an answer for that because there wasn't a good one. Ryan didn't press charges, mostly for his father's sake, but he did something Patricia clearly hadn't planned for. He restructured his own stake in the company with his real attorney, moving it into a trust that named me as co-trustee, specifically so that no single family member could ever again attempt something like this without both of us agreeing. He also stepped back from day-to-day involvement in the family business entirely, handing his responsibilities to a general manager who had nothing to do with the family, and started consulting independently instead, something he told me he'd wanted to do for years but never had the courage to bring up. It's been 8 months now since that meeting. Ryan made a full recovery, physically and eventually emotionally, though he still gets quiet sometimes when his mother's name comes up. We see Patricia and Gerald only a handful of times a year now, at holidays, briefly, politely, with Robert's paperwork quietly sitting in a filing cabinet as a kind of insurance neither of us ever talks about out loud. Kayla still works at the company. Gerald retired early, sooner than anyone expected, and I sometimes wonder if 30 years of going along with things finally caught up to him too. Danielle still teases me about the parking lot phone call, telling everyone at family gatherings that I solved a corporate takeover attempt from a hospital parking garage at 2 o'clock a.m. Robert became more than just a lawyer to us. He handled the trust paperwork personally and still checks in every few months, mostly, I think, because he's genuinely curious how the rest of the family situation settled. Ryan says it settled about as well as it could, given everything, and I think that's fair. Nobody got arrested, nobody was cut off completely, but nobody involved will ever forget what almost happened either, and that memory does more to keep things honest now than any lawsuit could have. What I learned from those 9 days is something I don't think I'll ever forget. Love doesn't mean assuming the people around you always have good intentions, especially when there's money or property involved. It means paying attention, asking questions, and keeping records, even when someone is smiling at you and calling it family. Patricia thought a hospital bed and a stack of paperwork would be enough to take everything Ryan and I had built. She just didn't expect the daughter-in-law she never respected to read every single page. I want to know what you would have done in my place. Would you have signed those papers to keep the peace, or would you have done exactly what I did? Let me know in the comments, and if this story hit home for you, follow along for more because trust me, this wasn't the strangest family I've ever married into. Thanks for watching until the very end, and I'll see you in the next one.